In this episode, I'm going to walk you through how to buy back your time from your podcast and why this is essential for growing both your podcast and your business simultaneously. Especially if you're currently spending hours every week editing, posting, repurposing clips, or managing freelancers instead of creating better content and building better relationships. A lot of podcast hosts are deeply involved in every part of their podcast, and they believe that this is a good thing. They want control over quality. They want to know what's going out under their name. They feel responsible for making sure every episode gets published correctly. And honestly, this is 100% justified. Your podcast is your voice, your authority, and often a major part of how people experience your brand. But the problem is staying involved with everything can be the reason that prevents your podcast from growing. If you're spending most of your podcast time editing audio, uploading episodes, chasing down assets, clipping videos, writing captions, doing all the quality checking on somebody else's work, you may feel productive during this, but you're probably not spending enough time on the things that actually grow the show in better guests, better conversations, better offers, better audience insights, and better strategy. We see this a lot with podcast hosts that come to us that are often coaches, consultants, marketers, and they come to us and they're buried in the weekly production cycle. For example, one of our clients, Michael from The Dental Marketer, a great podcast you should check out. He was recently saying in an interview, "I stayed busy enough to feel productive, but too overwhelmed to know how to scale." And now with a lot of the support and production side off of his plate, he has consistently published over 1,100 episodes with over 1 million downloads and views across YouTube and podcast platforms. And more importantly, the bandwidth to keep having great conversations while scaling both his podcast and his business. So in this episode, we're going to break down why time is one of the biggest hidden growth levers in your podcast. We're going to talk about Dan Martell's drip matrix from Buy Back Your Time, and how it can help you identify which podcast tasks you should delegate, replace, invest in, or protect, and how buying back your time gives you the creative bandwidth to grow your show, land better opportunities, and still have energy left for the most important parts of life. If you're new here, welcome. This is Full Funnel Podcasting. This is where we learn to grow, monetize, and systematize our podcasts without burning out. All right, so let's talk about some of the issues of doing everything yourself in podcasting. So a lot of hosts are technically working on the podcast every week, but most of that work is maintenance and not actually growth work. Things like editing, publishing, formatting the show notes, checking clips, creating social posts, uploading to platforms, coordinating with guest assets. And all these things matter, but they're not usually the highest value use of a host's time. These sorts of things keep the show alive, but they don't necessarily make the show better, more profitable, or more influential. And these things kind of throw you into a weekly podcast treadmill, where it's just every week you're in this production loop of record an episode, edit the episode, write or review the title and description, create a bunch of clips, repurpose the assets, upload and schedule, share with the guest, post on socials, start planning out the next episode. And if you own all of these tasks as the host, it's going to be really hard to get out of this reaction sort of mode that you're in. Basically, the next deadline is going to hit before you had time to actually strategically think about the show. And that's going to keep you busy on this just constant treadmill of just like keeping the show alive, essentially. And the core problem isn't just that these production tasks take a lot of time. That's a big part of it, but there also is the factor of mental bandwidth. So you might technically have time to think about better guests, sponsorship opportunities, client conversions, researching your audience, but a lot of times you might be too mentally drained to actually do it well. Because when you're doing the high-level podcast growth things, you need a lot of space and mental bandwidth for that type of thinking. So let's imagine a dental consultant here who hosts a podcast for practice owners. They might spend anywhere from 6 to 10 hours each week doing editing, writing, social captions, posting episodes, checking video clips, communicating with freelancers, all the logistical stuff. Meanwhile, the truly valuable growth activities get pushed aside. That might mean reaching out to a high authority dentist or a successful dental entrepreneur as a guest. That might mean following up with a listener who asked a thoughtful question, creating a stronger offer for practice owners, reviewing which episodes are actually creating leads, or building a partnership with a dental software company as a sponsor. So the hardest part about this is that they feel productive every week. because they're doing a ton of stuff, and it feels authentic because they're involved in every part of the process. But the show is not actually becoming a stronger business asset. And if we go back to Michael's quote from the Dental Marketer, it's the perfect summary of what happens to a lot of hosts in this field. Is I stayed busy enough to feel productive, but too overwhelmed to know how to scale. And a lot of hosts are having this issue where they're busy enough to feel like they're doing the right things, but they're overwhelmed to the point where they can't really zoom out and make the bigger picture calls. So buying back their time actually helps create space for consistency, better conversations, and bigger business growth. Because if you're always putting out fires and reacting to deadlines like these, you're probably not building up the future of your podcast. The real growth starts when hosts stop acting like the entire production department and start acting like the strategic leader of the show. All right, so we're going to dive into Buy Back Your Time by Dan Martell. And it's a great book. You should go check it out if you haven't yet. But there's a certain concept in the book called his drip matrix that I think is especially helpful for podcasters to visualize. And if you're watching on YouTube, I'll have a visual up so you can see kind of more what it looks like. But essentially it breaks tasks into 4 categories. The first one is delegate, which are things that have low financial return for you and also take a lot of your energy and time. The next quadrant is replace. These things have pretty good financial return for you, but also take a lot of time and energy. The next one is the invest quadrant. And these are things that give you energy and recharge you and fill you up, but they also have low financial return. And the final quadrant is the production quadrant. And these are things that are high financial return for you, and they also give you tons of energy. This is like your passionate stuff that earns you a good ROI. And for podcasters specifically, this matrix can help reveal why a podcast feels exhausting even when it has growth potential. All right, so let's look into the first quadrant here, the delegate quadrant. And this is the stuff that you're probably going to want to try to outsource as fast as possible. And these are tasks that drain you and don't create much direct value from your unique expertise. And in podcasting, these are things like cleaning up audio mistakes, removing filler words, uploading files, formatting for descriptions, scheduling episodes, naming, organizing folders, pulling clips from episodes, checking if all the links are correct. And all these tasks are important to keep the podcast going, but they don't usually need the host to perform them. For example, if you're a coach or a consultant or an expert in some field, your time is usually worth far more in client conversations, partnerships, strategy, or just content creation. And those things are going to be a lot more valuable than cleaning up audio, for example. All right, so if we go up a level in the quadrant to the replace quadrant, these are things that have a fairly good return on them, but also take a lot of time and energy. And these ones also might be a little bit harder to let go of for a lot of podcast hosts. These things might be quality checking every clip because you don't fully trust the freelancer that you're working with, writing social captions from scratch, managing all the guest follow-up emails, building out episode web pages, creating promotional graphics, or handling all the back and forth communication between all the contractors and freelancers that you're working with for your podcast. And these tasks are sort of a trap because they may feel important and the host may be actually pretty skilled at a lot of these things. But the problem is they steal energy from the best work that they could be doing. And essentially they could be replaced by a better person, process, or system in that realm. And this is where a lot of hosts get actually stuck because they technically outsourced things, but they didn't actually buy back their time because now they're just stuck managing the chaos and all the quality checking of these things. All right, now we're going to go to the invest quadrant. And these are things that give you lots of energy, but they have low financial return. And you're definitely going to want to have some of these in your schedule because these are things that give you life essentially and light you up. These are activities that may not produce immediate revenue this week, but they build a better future for your life, your podcast, and your business. These things can be studying your audience's biggest problems, listening to sales calls or client questions for episode ideas, brushing up on interview skills, mapping out future content themes, building relationships with dream guests, learning how to communicate your offer more clearly, and even spending time with family and friends so you don't end up burning out. This is where I like Stephen Covey's philosophy on this, where he has a Similar quadrant system, but one of the quadrants is important but non-urgent tasks. And this is in the book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. But essentially, these are super important things that often get postponed because they're not urgent today. And a really good example for something that fits into the Covey quadrant of important but not urgent is something like exercise or going to the gym, because that's something that is important, but there's no demand today, like I have to go to the gym today. But years from now, if you consistently go to the gym, you will be healthier. So that's a good example of something that fits in that quadrant outside of podcasting. But consistency is the thing behind podcasting that really makes it work. So a healthier, more effective host often comes with these investment type quadrant activities. And then the last quadrant is the production quadrant. This is stuff that will have high return for you and also gives you a lot of energy. Like this is your passionate stuff and your expertise. So this is essentially the genius zone of the host here. And some examples of this could be recording high quality conversations, interviewing ideal clients or referral partners, creating solo episodes that could be thought leader type episodes, having sales conversations with warm leads, building strategic collaborations, pitching to sponsors, or turning your audience insights into actual offers. And I'll use another example of a dental consultant, because a lot of our clients are in this space, in the healthcare consultant realm. So for a dental consultant, this could mean interviewing a respected multi-location practice owner, creating a solo episode on a common growth bottleneck for dental practices, following up with a guest who could become a great referral partner, or creating content based on real problems dental practice owners bring up during consultations with you. And these are all activities that actually create authority, trust, and also business momentum. All right, so that's the drip matrix from Dan Martell's book, Buy Back Your Time. Again, go read the book if you haven't. It's an awesome book. But to bring this to a practical zone for podcasters, I want you to write down every single recurring task that you are involved in for your podcast and try to put your tasks into each of the 4 quadrants of the drip matrix. And if you're having trouble trying to figure out which quadrants these tasks go into, you can ask yourself things like, does this task require my voice, expertise, or relationships? Does this task directly grow the show or the business? Does this task give me energy or drain me? And if I stopped doing this personally, what would become possible? Because the goal is not to eliminate your involvement or authenticity or individuality in the show. The goal is to protect your involvement for the work that only you can do. But buying back your time is not just an operational decision. It actually improves the overall creative quality of the podcast. Because a super tired host creates a lot differently than a clear-headed, energized host. And if you're recording after hours of editing, troubleshooting, uploading, and managing a bunch of details, you're probably not showing up with your best questions or sharpest insights. Great content usually comes from curiosity, presence, preparation, and recognizing common themes between the conversations. And all of these things require some amount of mental headspace to pick up on. And when a host has more time to think strategically, they can stop saying yes to every guest possible. And they can start asking, who would my audience benefit from the most? Who already serves the same audience, but from maybe a different angle? Who could become a referral partner? Who would make our show more credible? Or who would create a conversation that actually stands out? And if you're a coach or a consultant, podcast guests are not just content sources. They can be collaborators, clients, referral partners, or just simply credibility builders. And if you have the headspace to prepare for these things, it just leads to way better conversations. You can research the guests more deeply. You can prepare questions that go beyond surface level talking points. You can connect the guest's experience with your audience pain points. You can ask stronger follow-up questions and ultimately create a more memorable listener experience. And an example of this in action for a dental consultant, say you're interviewing a practice owner, and a generic question would just be like, how did you grow your practice? Whereas with a little bit more prep and strategy behind the question, you can ask something like, what was the first operational bottleneck that made you realize your practice could not keep growing with the same systems? The second question creates a much stronger conversations because it connects directly to what the listeners are actually struggling with day to day. Having more time and mental bandwidth also helps you understand your listeners better, because podcast growth depends on knowing what your audience is actually dealing with. And if a host is constantly buried in production work, they may not have time to read listener emails, review comments and DMs, talk directly to ideal clients, notice recurring questions or issues that are brought up, or study which episodes lead to the most inquiries or conversations. Because the best content often comes from listening closely to your audience, not from just guessing or asking generic questions. More time and mental bandwidth also helps you with solo episodes too, because solo episodes require a lot of clarity. They're harder to create when the host is rushing, and when the host buys back their time and has the mental headspace to strategize and not be burned out. They can develop stronger frameworks, opinions, stories, and examples throughout the episodes. And this can be especially important for a strategy for consultants, because solo episodes are where you can establish a lot of your authority, where you're talking through things strategically and can demonstrate your expertise. Because a lot of good episodes from consultants are formed around their clients' patterns that they have, mistakes that they see repeatedly, strong points of view or points that are contrary to popular belief, clear teaching frameworks, or making abstract advice concrete with actual stories, numbers, and things to make it practical for the listener. Another key point about all this is that you can't build a truly differentiated podcast if you're only giving it leftover energy. Buying back time from the podcast actually allows you to become more creative, strategic, and useful to your listeners. But buying back your time isn't all about just growing your podcast and your business. It also helps create balance in your life and prevent burnout in the long run. And a common mistake from this is you free up your time by buying it back, and then you fill up all that free time with more work. And sometimes the actual highest value and sustainable use of that time could be simply rest, family, health, or personal development things. And this is where we tie back to the investment quadrant from Dan Martell and Stephen Covey's important but not urgent tasks. These are things like long-term planning, personal growth, relationship building, or your health. And these are things that typically don't demand your attention right today, but in the long term, they shape the quality of your life and your work. And another quadrant that Stephen Covey talks over in his book is the important and urgent quadrant. And this is where a ton of podcast hosts live. This is the loop that you get into where the episode has to go out, the guest needs the link, the clip is late, the description still needs approval, or the file needs to be fixed. And this loop can keep you trapped, feeling like there's no room for anything else. And if you want to be in podcasting for the long game, your podcast should support your business and your life, not consume both of them. If your podcast is constantly creating stress, resentment, or working on weekends or late nights, it will inevitably affect the quality of the show at some point. Healthy hosting means building a show that's sustainable, and sustainability matters because podcast growth usually compounds over time, and a host who stays consistent for years has a huge advantage over a host who burns out after 6 months. And the main mindset shift here is going from trying to be productive to actually being the leader for your podcast. Because it's okay for you to want your podcast to grow, but it's also okay for you to want your evenings back. It's okay for you to not want to record a conversation and have to edit it for the rest of the day. It's okay to want space for your family, hobbies, health, friendships, or creative thinking, because buying back your time is not laziness, it's leadership. So instead of asking, can I technically do this myself? Or thinking, I'm going to be the one that's going to do this the absolute best, try reframing it as, is this the best use of my energy? Is this helping the show grow? Is this helping my business grow? Is this helping me become a better host? And is this helping me live the life that I want? And the answers to those questions will often point to whether you need to delegate something, replace something, or just have better systems around it. And here at Pod Punch, buying back your time is especially important because for our clients who are doing weekly podcasts, we often help them reclaim about 8 or more hours every week on production. And that's not just 8 hours of task time. That's 8 hours of decision fatigue, quality control, deadline pressure, and drag on creativity that's just completely removed from the host's plate. Over a month, that can be over 30 hours of bandwidth and energy lost. And over a year, that could be hundreds of hours that could be redirected towards growth, relationships, better content, and a life outside the podcast. So if your podcast is taking 6, 8, even 10 plus hours every week to produce, it may be time to really ask whether that work still belongs on your plate. I want you to take 15 minutes this week and list every recurring podcast task that you do. Place it under the drip matrix that we discussed earlier in the episode. Delegate, replace, invest, or the production quadrant, and just see where you might be losing a lot of time with your podcast. And if you want our help with buying back your time without sacrificing quality, check out the link in the show notes below. Answer a few quick questions, and we'll see if PodPunch is the right fit to reclaim those hours and grow your show with a little bit more breathing room. And of course, if this episode was helpful for you, be sure to follow on whichever platform you're listening on. Share with a friend who needs this specific episode, and we'll see you on the next one.